On Friday, I went up to Monticello to participate in their annual Founders Day celebration. Jefferson himself publicly said that he didn't want people celebrating his birthday. He wanted folks to concentrate on the birthday of the United States instead. But each year, the Jefferson Foundation holds festivities to mark the anniversary of the birth of this, our third president. There are awards given, speeches made, and I was there because about 24 organizations and institutions bring wreaths. Everyone from the Sons of the American Revolution to the Office of the President of the United States of America, and Thomas Jefferson Memorial Church, Unitarian, Universalist. I can understand the desire to go against Jefferson's wishes. There's a lot to celebrate about this man who helped found this nation. He was a lawyer, a statesman, an author, a scientist, an inventor, an architect, deeply interested in religion and philosophy and history and, well, just about everything. He was a state legislator, a governor, a member of the Continental Congress, minister to France, secretary of state, vice president, and two-term president. He spoke 5 languages fluently, and he amassed the largest library of any individual person in the United States. He really deserves the title Renaissance man. And in a time when the religious and political right like to hold up our country's founders as if they provide proof positive that the right's dogmatic and oft-times dangerous positions go back to the very beginnings of our nation, Thomas Jefferson gives them a problem. This is the man who, when he was president, took a razor to his Bible, excising the passages that he felt were full of superstition and stupidity, retaining only those phrases he felt came directly from Jesus and which were distinguishable from the rest, as he put it, as diamonds in a dunghill. Imagine how the religious right must squirm to hear one of their vaunted founders of this Christian nation describing much of the Christian scriptures as a dunghill. Jefferson is also a man who literally gave us the phrase, the separation of church and state. And he gave us the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which begins, whereas Almighty God has made the mind free, and concludes, be it enacted by General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, and don't get any ideas, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in the body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or beliefs, but that all men should be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no ways diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capabilities. Pretty cool. But it wasn't just religious freedom that Jefferson championed. I would love to hear the Rush Limbaughs and Glenn Becks and Sean Hannity's respond to this. I am not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change with the change of circumstances, institutions must advance also to keep pace with the times. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him when a boy, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors. Of course, it probably could go without saying that it was from his mind and through his pen that perhaps the 5 most important words in American history were written: all men are created equal. When Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he pointed to those words. When the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he called those words a promissory note, which, he said, was now long past due. The echo of these historic words can be heard today in the struggle for marriage equality and for immigrants' rights, and wherever their fullness has not yet been realized. And yet, you knew there was going to be an and yet. Some of you were hoping there was going to be an and yet, right? Over the years, there have developed essentially two responses to Jefferson's legacy. One is to celebrate it, to glorify it, to lift him up and put him on a pedestal, and to sweep under the carpet and behind the curtain the fact that at the time he wrote those 5 words, Thomas Jefferson owned several hundred women, children, and men. And at the time of his death, those enslaved persons were not put up on a pedestal, but instead the auction block. This response contends that what matters most is the vision he gave to our nation and to the world, even if he himself did not fully understand that vision. The other response, one that I've actually heard several times since coming here, is that we should take him off the pedestal, bring him down from the mountaintop, and put him right in the middle of Mulberry Road. To say that what matters most about this man, what must matter most to us, living as we do in the 21st century where those 5 words still haven't fully flowered, is not so much what he said or did for this country and the cause of liberty, but what he did and failed to do at home. New research and analysis makes it extremely difficult to continue to say that Jefferson was simply a man of his times and so caught up in the culture of slavery around him, or as the picture on the front of the order of service says, a slave to his time and place. New research and new analysis makes it extremely difficult to say that he was a relatively magnificent slave owner, as such things go, and that we have to judge him not by our standards, but by the standards of his own day. Well, we ought to take those standards into account when we contemplate the man, of course, but by whose standards other than ours are we to judge whether to praise or bury him? Even in his own day, there were abolitionists, people who had heard in some of Jefferson's own earlier writings stirring words about the evils of slavery, but who waited in vain for there to be action to give life to those words. And while Jefferson was well known for his personal preference for lenience when it came to disciplining the enslaved workforce, recent studies are suggesting that it was, at least in part, because of his willingness to have the children whipped, that he didn't feel he needed to whip the adults. They'd already had it beaten out of them, if you will. And it is clear that when it was seen necessary to enforce discipline, he had people in his employ who had no qualms about doing so vigorously. Jefferson also was not simply engaged in the prevailing culture of slavery, he was a pioneer in the monetization of slavery. It had been commonplace to think of enslaved people as property and even to have slaves seized to pay off debts. But Jefferson was apparently one of the first to think about using his slave holdings as collateral when trying to get a loan. And even came to believe that the greatest values of the slaves he owned was not the work that they were able to do, but their ability to reproduce. He once noted in his famous farm journal that simply through reproduction he was getting a 4% return on investment. This does not look like someone who unthinkingly was going with the flow. He seems to have thought about the role of slavery in his own life as studiously as he thought about everything else. As I said, contemporaries who believed in Jefferson's words that slavery was a moral outrage even tried to help him, as we would say, to walk his talk. In 1817, the Revolutionary War hero whose name I'm about to butcher, Thaddeus left. No one came up after 9:15 to correct me, so. In 1817, wrote with the direct request that it be used to free Jefferson slaves and purchase land and farming equipment for them to settle safely elsewhere. This money could also have greatly reduced the debt that hung over Monticello and which has been blamed for Jefferson not emancipating his slaves on his death. Yet Jefferson refused his old friend's gift. It is hard to argue that he would have if he could have, because it seems he could have, and he didn't. I believe that even in Jefferson's Bible, Jesus is remembered as admonishing his followers, no one can serve two masters, for either you will hate the one and love the other, or else you will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is an ancient word that is usually translated as money or wealth. And this may be the key to understanding the paradox of Jefferson. This may be exactly what he was trying to do. And as Mike will explore more fully in a moment, it's something that most of us can relate to too. When our ideals are in conflict with our comfort, or our position, or our sense of identity, or our sense of safety and security, or whatever it is that they've come into conflict with, what do we do? Which do we put first? Or do we try to do it all? It's easy, I think, to let Jefferson off the hook and to focus only on his achievements. It is, I think, actually equally easy to dismiss him and focus only on his failures. What is hard, and what I think we are actually called to do, is to find the way to acknowledge the paradox and then to embrace the complexity of life. Simplifications are seldom solutions. We have been blessed by this name and our association with this complex man who so clearly personifies the contradictions of our country. I hope we will find in that association inspiration in the vision of what could be, and a deeper sense of responsibility to do what must be done to bring that vision fully to life.